Hi folks, welcome to another edition of My Life with Robert Burns. I'm here with Jim Thompson. Hi Jim.
Hi Douglas, hi everybody.
And for this episode we've got another change to our format for you. We're talking to two people at once. Now we've done that before, but so when we've done it before it's been people in the same family. This time we've got two great friends and cronies. One of them's for Turboughton, the other one's for Mauchline. We've got John Shirkie and Billy Niven.
Hi, yeah.
Hi boys, thanks for having us on.
Aye, thank you.
So how are you guys doing today?
I'm fine, just a bit kind of like everybody else, a wee bit fed up being in the house oftener than they want to be.
Aye, likewise. I'm just finished my work. I work with Network Rail, so keeping the wheels of industry moving, as they say, but unfortunately we've got no passengers in the trains at the moment, so sometimes you think you're out there just doing it for the results, if you like. But anyway, well, that's where I was today. I'm no longer in, actually.
Okay, well, you've started telling us a bit about yourself already, John, so maybe you could continue with that. What's your story?
Well, my story is I was born in Turboughton, 1957. I was born up Field Avenue, and that's where I stayed for the first part of my life. My primary school years or just about it. And then the family, my father got a job at the Barney Pit, and this is how it worked in these days. There was no buses run for the Turboughton to the Barney, so he got a house in Mauchline because our buses run from Mauchline to the Barney. So we moved house just so he could get a bus to his work. That's who we went to there. But I got my first taste of buns at Turboughton Primary School. An old teacher who was fantastic, Miss Payton, her name was, and she was great. I mean, that's one of the things when I do bun suppers, or sometimes here, and Billy will be the same, when he comes on, you'll go to bun suppers and you'll maybe hear folks saying, oh, there's women at this bun supper, I'll not be too heavy in buns. Some women could learn some of the men in buns, let me tell you. All Miss Payton could have anyway. She was great, so that's where I got my taste in buns. And then when we moved up to Mauchline, Mauchline Primary was a great school for getting taught buns. You'll probably remember a way back, well, in the early 60s, remember Bill Tennant for STV?
Yep.
He came to Mauchline Primary and filmed with a buns competition every year, and I won the reciting competition at the poem that Billy I think's got to do later on. You've got to hear, I won it for doing that, and that was the reciting side. And a boy from Mauchline who was a good singer at the time, I don't think he ever went into doing singing buns, but he won the singing side for My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose. I ended up with a career working in the railways as a reciter, and Ronnie Barber was the boy's name. He ended up as a producer with Channel 4 television. I always said the singers always get the best jobs and the best gigs. So, but that's where, and people will say to you, Ken, why were they into buns so much? Well, the teachers when I was at Mauchline School actually went to a lot of bun suppers themselves. I remember one teacher in particular that we didn't get lessons. He'd been at a bun supper the night before, so he was sitting at his desk a bit hungover, and we got no lessons that day in his class, which was quite good. So your teachers were into buns, so we obviously rubbed off on us. But that was my kind of life in buns through my school days. But that's where it came to. Turboughton, or Turboughton as you call it, rightly, Douglas and Mauchline are the two epicentres of buns anyway. So if your teachers were into buns, it transferred down to the pupils.
And what happened at secondary school, John? Did you do buns at all there?
Well, Mauchline was a secondary.
Of course it was.
That was a secondary till Mauchline Academy get built, and then we get moved there. But I was in the first year at secondary school at Mauchline, and then get moved to Mauchline Academy when it was built. And I finished up. You didn't get so much buns at Mauchline Academy. There was buns in the curriculum, but it was just like a lot. It was the style of buns. But at Mauchline School and Turboughton School, you got buns. You actually get buns poetry to read. I was never so keen in the buns, Ken, like in the style of buns, where the teachers would make up the verses. I was always more keen in the buns poetry.
And after secondary school, did you say you went to the Barney or did you just straight to Network Rail?
I went to Killich. I worked at Killich Pit till it closed. That was my working life. I worked at Killich and then the pit's shut. I was one of the lashings out of Killich. You'll ken Ian Farrell in the burn scene. Ian was an engineer at the Killich. And I remember I was quite young then, but obviously when the pit shut in 1986, that was me. And then I got a job as a postman for a few years, working at Maughline. And then I got a job with Adam Cunningham. You'll ken Adam.
Yep.
Adam, who owned the Adam Cunningham and Son, the crisps and sweeties and drinks distributor. I worked with him for about 15 years. And then for the last 20 years, I've worked with the railway.
And what about outside your working life? You've got some tremendous interest there, have you not?
Oh, mainly golf. I think I joined Ballochmyle Golf Club along with my pal Billy and everything. Billy joined maybe about 6 months before me. So we've both been members of Ballochmyle for more than 40 years. I became a past captain at Ballochmyle and a past club champion. So golf was my main sport. I played football, obviously. Everybody did when you were younger, but golf took my notion later on. So, and it still is. I still like playing golf. If we can ever get out to it with the weather in the winter, it's certainly a fair weather game if you stay in Scotland with the weather.
And were you guys pals at school?
I knew Billy, but never. I reckon I've known Billy for at least 45 years. Or more than that, about 48 years actually. But Billy was a wee bit older than me, you know. Thank me for saying that. But we have been pals for many, many years. Right through our golfing days, obviously that was where we met most often socially. And at Masons, Billy's a past master of the lodge that Robert Burns was initiated into, and I'm a past master of the lodge that he joined. Talk about that later on, mind you.
Yeah.
But one of the things, the Burns supper we have at Turbolton, I'll get into a wee bit of the Burns now if you don't mind, Douglas. Is that all right?
Aye, no bother.
The Burns supper we have at Turbolton, we always say it's a Burns supper that the Bard asks for himself in his farewell to the burial of St James's Lodge. I'll quote the last verse. He says, when he's saying his goodbyes, when he's talking about immigrating to the Indies, he says, "A last request, permit me here, when yearly ye assemble all, one round I ask it with a tear to him the bard that's far awo." So the nearest Saturday, the 25th every year, we honour that request. And when you're deputy master, you have got to recite the poem in full. And they're not allowed to, I mean, a lot of the boys that's in the Masons at Turbolton, because it's what they call the Lodge of Robert Burns, they all think they're great Burns men. They're not really. A lot of them have no idea. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but they've just never read Burns. But when they become deputy master, they've got to stand up in front of 150 Freemasons and recite that poem off by heart. They're not allowed to read it out of the book or read it off a sheet of paper. Well, if they did, they wouldn't become master the following year. Put it that way.
Yeah.
But one of the things you do, when I was deputy master, I'll tell you this wee story. Burns, as you can, when he was in the Masons at Turbolton, when he became the deputy master, he was in charge of the lodge, because the master at that time was usually the landed gentry became the master just through their position. Just for an example, I'll give you, Burns was made deputy master in 1784, and he held it till 1788 till he moved to Hellisland. And the two men that were master during his term as deputy were Sir John Hamilton of Sundrum and Sir James Dalrymple of Orangefield. So 2 knights of the realm, in other words. So Burns, they always got it just by their position. They became master. But when I was deputy master, the year was 1988 when I became deputy Turbolton. And I was sitting in the house getting ready to go to the Burns supper, and I had learned the farewell. I had to recite it that night. And I was sitting in the house, and I don't know what made me think. I said, Burns, when he was deputy master, must have walked from his Eel to Turbolton, because he held the meetings in there 31 times during all the 4 years. I says, I'm going to walk to the lodge. And Billy was like, we went down together. We usually got a lift down. And I went up and chapped the door. I says, Billy, I'm going to walk to the lodge tonight for my zeal, the way Burns did. He says, you fancy joining me? He says, I'll get you down there. I'm going to lift down the car. And I did it. And I remember I go to the quarters of the way and it snowed like Billy for Barner Hill, Ferrum, all the way down past Willie's Mill. And I went into the lodge like a snowman, get the coat and that off, and I actually got a change of glaze. But what I was going to tell you was when I became master, as a master of the lodge interval, and you get picking who does your immortal memory. And I picked Billy to do my immortal memory in 1990. And Billy's another member of the lodge interval for doing that. So that was the best accolade I could give him. What an immortal memory it was, I can tell you. It's quite a place to do it, isn't it, Billy?
Oh, without a doubt.
And so is that a cue for us to talk to Billy a bit and hear a bit about his story?
Well, I think so. I'll pass him over to him and I'll come back to you later on and tell you a wee bit about the characters I've met in Burns.
Great.
Well, Douglas, Billy Niven is my name, as you know. I was born as Maist. Ayrshire babies were in the days in Irvine Central. My parents stayed in Mauchline, so I was brought home to the family house in Mauchline, which was a big sandstone tenement in Loudon Street, which is no longer there now.
Aye.
There's, I think, either 3 or 4 houses that sit back at the bus stop.
Yeah.
That's where the tenement building was, where I was born in 1949, and I've stayed almost 72 years in Mauchline since then. We moved up to Lone Hill Avenue, and when these houses were just built, we were actually the first family to get into one of them.
Uh-huh.
And I always remember when I was about 6 years old, I used to go out and roast the men to death that were building the houses. And there was an old bricklayer there, and in fact, another part of the story, I finished up working with him, an old worldly from Mauchline called Johnny Spears. And Johnny kind of taken me under his wing, and every Friday he used to give me a wee brown poke with some pennies in it. And I mean, I thought I was the king of the world, getting that wee brown poke with 2 pennies in it for Johnny every week. But anyway, I went to Mauchline School in 1954. As John said earlier, Mauchline in the days was a primary and secondary school.
Yep.
And at the time I was there, if you passed the 11 plus, you went to Cumnock. If you failed the 11 plus, you saw out your days at Mauchline. Now, me being one of these guys that didn't like the school at all, and maybe was a bit thick, I saw out my days at Mauchline. So I left Mauchline Primary School at 15 years of age. I left the school on the Friday and I started work with Finlay and Mauchline as an apprentice bricklayer on the Monday. I mean, in the days, Finlay and Mauchline was a massive company. They used to start 10 apprentices every year. Every single year they started 10 apprentices. Bricklayers, joiners and plasterers every year. And so I started in 1964. My time was out in 1969. 2 or 3 years after that, I became self-employed for a long number of years. And then I went into management and I retired. I actually retired 4 times before I could get used to it, but I retired for the 4th time 3.5 years ago, and I'm enjoying it fine now. I used to listen to all guys saying, "Oh, I wish I was retired." No, I've retired and I can't deal with it. And I used to say, you must be mad. But it's a strange feeling when you've worked for the best part of 50 years and then all of a sudden one Monday morning you wake up, you have no work to go to. You have nowhere to go. It's very strange. And I found it hard for a wee while, but we're there now, enjoy it. And for the last few years, we've been unpaid babysitters, I think you might call us. Well, my main interest is golf, and as John said there, we both joined around about the same time, 1979. We've both been past captains of the golf club, and through Burns having the same interest, we just clicked. And a lot of folk early years have got as a double act. In fact, I thought maybe when you asked the 2 years to come on together, you were maybe hoping that we would come on and fall out with one another about Burns, because that's been known over the years.
Would you have a debate?
Well, certainly that's what Bob Bailey.
Would you have a debate? Aye.
Well, you know what Burns is like. I mean, Burns opens up many angles of debate, and we don't always agree about what he was or what he wasn't and all the rest of it, and the crack's quite good. As it is, not just with John, but we have a really good circle of friends that are into Burns, and not so much this last 2 or 3 years, because unfortunately a couple of them have passed away, and another couple are not so fit as they used to be, but we used to meet regular. And the night consisted of just what we're doing right now, having a right good chinwag about Burns.
Yeah.
And hard to beat, hard to beat.
Well, you're giving us the perfect link, and we're back to Burns again. So I'm going to pass over to Jim to get you talking a bit more about Burns. Over to you, Jim.
Right. Just the first question I would ask you both, and maybe if we can start with Billy, is what was it specifically that attracted you to Burns?
Well, at school I wasn't really interested in Burns. You got Burns being at Maugham School, but as I said earlier on, I wasn't really interested in much at the school because I didn't like the school. But anyway, I left the school, I got working, and then in 1971, a friend of ours, his dad asked us if we wanted to go to a Burns supper. And the Burns supper was at the Masonic Lodge in Maugham. And we went to it. I liked what I saw. I enjoyed what I heard. We went back the next year. Again, I enjoyed it. And then the following year, through going to the Burns suppers, I joined the lodge. The Burns supper, it was either 72 or 73 before I joined the lodge. The Burns supper, there was a big American guy done the immortal memory. I'll never forget his name. His name was Neil Mackay. Now, I don't know whether he came over to Maugham specifically to do the immortal memory at the Burns supper, or whether he was there, he'd come on holiday and somebody had asked him if he'd do it, because he was over here for a couple of weeks. And whether it was because he's American drawl, or whether it was because he was a great big guy, he had a presence, and obviously his knowledge, his very high knowledge of Burns, it impressed me. It stuck in my mind listening to that fella, because his immortal memory always stuck in my mind. And I found myself saying, you know, I'd like to do something like that one of these days. And thankfully I did get round to doing it. And he told a joke one night that stuck in my mind as well. That same night, he told a joke it's not the best joke you've ever heard, but I always remembered it. He told about when he was on the train for Glasgow and he was going to Inverness. And he got on the train, and the train was jam-packed. There was only one seat left in the train, and this old woman had her wee dog sitting in it. And he says to her, "Excuse me, ma'am, but do you think you could let me sit down?" And she got very indignant, and she said, "No, indeed I will not." Of course, him being the gentleman, he walked up and down the carriage, and he come back down, and that was the only seat that was in the place. And he says, "I must insist, madam, that you move your dog. I've paid a lot of money for this, and I don't want to be standing for Glasgow to Inverness." And again, she indignantly told him that the dog wouldn't be getting moved. So the window of the train was open. The big American lifted the wee dog and he threw it right out the window. And there was a guy sitting across the passageway, and he turned around and he says to him, "You know, you Americans are all the same." He says, "You can't do nothing right." He said, "You drive on the wrong side of the road. The steering wheel and the cars are on the wrong side of the car." He says, "You eat your meals with your feet on the wrong horn." He says, "And you've done it again." He says, "You've flung the wrong bitch out the window." He says. And that always stuck in my mind, but it's a long time ago. But yes, I was very impressed with that big guy, and that was first Burns supper at Maugham was in 1971, and apart from 4 years ago, my wife was, I've never missed one. And for the last 15 years, I've actually chaired the Burns supper at Maugham. So going to the Burns supper early days, and a lot today with joining the lodge too got me really interested in Burns. And I mean, the friends I've made, and I'm talking about real friends, and the people I've met over the years through Burns, is just nobody's business. Unbelievable.
And John, what about yourself? What attracted you specifically to Burns? There's lots of poets in the world.
Oh, Burns was just different, as I say, almost pagan. I mean, that was the start, as I said earlier, but Maugham School, I was never academically gifted. I'll be honest with you. And I knew I could recite Burns's poetry because my granny stayed in number 1 Dick Terrace. See, when I say that, a lot of folk don't know where I'm talking about. But that is a row of cottages in the Misgill Road in the Burns Memorial Homes. Tibby Hamilton stays in that cottage now, but my granny and grandpa stayed in there for many, many years. My mother used to take me up, and my granny used to recite Burns. My grandpa as well, funny enough, but my granny used to speak at the Burns suppers, and she did stuff doing at the Women's Rural and stuff like that. And I've got a black and white photograph in the house. And many years ago, a Burns supper at the Memorial Homes in Mauchline, with my granny addressing the haggis. Dr. Rawson, you remember him? He was carrying in the haggis, and Sanny Davini was the piper. So every time I was up at my granny's at the Memorial Homes, there was always a Burns book lying about, and she would always hit you with quotes, a Burns. So it was always in me. It really was. And as I say, I wasn't academically gifted. And because I knew a bit about Burns, when the reciting competitions come around at the school and that, I was keen to do them. So that's who I really got into it. But then I get into the Burns supper scene as well, mainly through the Masons Day, Regina and the Lodge at Tyrbolton. Billy, I remember at Mauchline Masonic Lodge as well, and the Burns supper there is a great night. And as Billy was saying earlier, he's chaired the Burns supper there for the last 15 years. The man that did it for years and years before Billy was an old past master of the lodge. You'll ken him, Bob Lawrence.
Yeah, remember him.
Bob was for the showman side of it. Remember the shows? Bob run name, but what a Burns man he was. And I remember Billy and me going up to the... Bob stayed in the Memorial Homes in Mauchline day in the latter days of his life. And I remember Billy and myself going up there to have a wee blether with him about Burns. And Bob was almost like the same kind of character as Phil Toad was. You know, big Phil Toad for Springside. Exactly the same. They could dish quote Burns. Bob would sit there next to the wee fire up at the Homes and dish quote Burns on it. And it's meeting folk like that. And past master John Weir as well, who was a headmaster at Glasgow Academy. He was a past master of the Lodge at Tyrbolton. Got a lot of him too. And then Enoch Curry. You would all ken Enoch.
Yeah.
So they were the guys you looked up to. And as I say, I was quite young. I was only 21 when I joined the Masons, same age as Burns, funny enough. And you met these men, like the Johnny Rowan and them from Auckland. You used to hear stories about them, past master Weir, Bob Lawrence. And these were giants of men. And it was just great to sit down and just listen to them. You never ever interjected unless they asked you something. That was the way it was. You just listened and learned. And it's like life, they've passed on. And sometimes when we go to Burns suppers, we talk now. I mean, I'm 64 my birthday. And you just wonder if only younger ones is coming through. Being a member of the Lodge at Tyrbolton, we gave the primary school at Tyrbolton £100 every year we gave them for their Burns competition. And they did it in Burns, in fairness. And you used to get invited along to judge it. And it was great to see, take you back to your own childhood, because the teachers were enthusiastic. And to see the Waynes trying their heart to reciting Burns and singing Burns was great. So that was always very humbling to go back to that. And it took you way back to your own early days. So that's a wee bit about how I get into Burns myself. And
John, I mean, I've heard you several occasions, obviously, more than one, at various events, doing recitations, and I'd be obliged if you could maybe do one for us now, so as the folk watching will be able to hear the great John Shirkie, his thing.
I'll have a wee drink of water, at least. Well, I'll be honest with you, Jim, I was thinking about what I would say the night when I come on. And I got into thinking about this lockdown that we're in. And I started thinking about Burns Day, thinking about him a lot, especially at this time of year. But Billy and myself, Day Burns, Billy mentioned it earlier, we debate a lot, and we talk about Burns a lot. It doesn't need to be January or near his birthday, we talk about him all year round. And I was thinking about what it's like in lockdown for us all at the moment. And then I thought about Burns. And I thought, well, he did suffer a kind of lockdown. There was no pandemic as such, but there was a kind of lockdown, if you like, that Burns was in, was when he moved to Mesquite Farm, just after the death of his father in 1784. When he moved to Mesquite Farm, it was one of the worst winters ever. And you know that with his writings. And he was more or less confined to the farmhouse in Mesquite for the end of October, right through to the end of May. He mentions a wee bit about it in the Epistle to Davy, and he talks about when the winds fell, Ben Lomond blow, and bore the door with driven snow, and hang us the ingle. I set me down to pass some time, or to spin a verse or twa a rhyme in Hamely Western jingle. Now, Billy and me's been up at Mesquite Farm, and it was a single story build in Burns' time, but the eaves are still about 5 feet 10 off the ground. Burns would always need to duck to get into it. But he tells Davy Siller, his good friend down at Spittleside, bore the door with driven snow. He couldn't actually get out the farmhouse because the snow was that high, it was up to the eaves of the building. And he lost all his crops the following year, he had the late harvest, etc., because it was almost Siberian weather in 1785. So I thought Burns knew a wee bit about what to do himself, and the poem I'm going to give you tonight is one that I like. I like a lot of his stuff, but I like this because it's not done very often. And one of his favourite walks when he was in Malton was doing it Buscoming along the Hound. We've got a good pal of yours that stays down there, John Marketing. You'll all ken John, lovely Burns singer. And his wee cottage was the toll cottage for the brig at Buscoming. And Burns takes a walk down from Mesquite one night, a wee donner down the river, his favourite walk. But he said he was just going for a walk. It turns out he was trying to court a lassie by the name of Kate Kemp, who stayed across the road, the other side of the bridge. And he met the miller for the Buscoming Mill, and they were walking along the Hound. And the miller got quite annoyed with Burns because he was talking and chatting back and forth, and Burns was ignoring him. And Burns went home and wrote this poem, and he was so concerned that he had been ignoring the miller for Buscoming. He went down the next day and gave him a copy of the poem he wrote. And the poem, the character he talks about it in it, the aged judge that he talks about in the other poem, The Vision, is Sir Thomas Muller of Glenlee. That was the name of Buscoming back then. And he was a brother of Patrick Muller, who, Fiddle Swinton, who gave Burns Ellisland, or at least out to him. So he gets a mention at the start. The poem's called Man Was Made to Mourn. The reason I like it is because, especially, it's quite poignant just now, Jim and Douglas, because the news is horrendous when you see the number of people that are losing their lives due to this COVID pandemic. But Burns talks about his father in the last verse of this wee poem. And sometimes death is not the horrors you think it is. Sometimes, and Burns saw his father before his very eyes going downhill, as a lot of us have done. And Burns talks about his father in the last verse where he says that death, sometimes it can be a friend. Right, I'll smoke and remember it all. This is Burns' Man Was Made to Mourn. When chill November's surly blast made fields and forests bare, yon evening as I walked forth along the banks of Ayr, I spied a man whose aged step seemed weary worn with care. His face was furrowed early years, and hoary was his hair. Young stranger, whither wanderest thou? Began the reverend sage. Does thirst of wealth thy step constrain, or youth or pleasure's rage? Or haply pressed with cares and woes, too soon thou hast begun to wander forth the me to mourn the miseries of man. O man, while in thy early years, how prodigal a time, misspending all thy precious years, thy glorious youth of prime. Alternate follies take the sway, licentious passions burn, which tenfold force his nature's law, that man was made to mourn. Look no alone in youth of prime or manhood's active might. Man then is just what he is kind, supported as his right. But see him on the edge of life, with cares and troubles worn, then age and want, ill-matched pair, she man was made to mourn. A few seem favourites of fate, in pleasure's lap caressed, yet think no the rich and great are likewise truly blessed. But oh, but crowds in every land, all wretched and forlorn, through weary life this lesson learn, that man was made to mourn. Money and shape the numerous ills, and woven with a frame, We're painted still we mark ourselves, regret, remorse and shame. And man whose heaven erected face, that smiles all love adorn, man's inhumanity man, makes countless thousands mourn. So yonder poor laboured wights, the abject mean and vile, will begs a brother o'er the earth to give them leave to toil, and see his lordly fellow worm, the pair petition spurn, and mindful of a weeping wife, and helpless offspring mourn. If I'm designed John Lordland's slave, by nature's law designed, why was an independent wish, I planted in my mind. If no, why am I subject to his cruelty or scorn, or who has man the will and poor to mark his fellow mourn. Yet let this not too much, my son, disturb thy youth for breast. This partial view of humankind is surely no the last. The pair oppressed honest man had never shared been born, had there no been some recompense to comfort those that mourn. O death, the poor man's dearest friend, the kindest and the best, how welcome the hour my aged limbs are laid with thee at rest. The great, the wealthy feel thy blow, frae pomp and pleasure torn, but oh, a blessed relief to those that weary laden mourn. That's Birdie's Man Was Made to Mourn. Billy, can I ask you something? See that big chap Neil Mackay? I believe I met him. Did he come back to a burn supper after in the memory?
Yes, him and his son come back to a burn supper, aye.
Aye, I thought I recalled seeing him. He was quite a big, impressive man, aye.
Aye, oh, he was a big, very, very, very nice guy. He really was.
Aye.
He was a nice guy. And he certainly impressed me. But again, a lot of folk, when you get into burns, a lot of folk impress you and a lot of folk help you along the way. The very first poem I ever learned or ever recited in public wasn't a Burns poem. It was a Robert Service poem, The Shooting of Dan McGrew.
You joined the club.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, well, Jim, it didn't. I'll tell you this story because it didn't end very well. I used to be a member of a wee club. It's no longer there now. It was called the Kitchen Cronies Club. We met in Pussy Nancy's. And the three words Kitchen Cronies Club were all spelled with a K. KKK. And that was that's another story, but I'll not tell you that. No politically correct that. But anyway, we used to have all our monthly meetings and with a dinner and dance, with a burn supper. And every year on the 2nd of January, we had what we used to call the mad morning. We just went down to Pussy Nancy's, into the big room, had a right good drink, right good blather, and everybody had to try and do something. So I learnt, in inverted commas, The Shooting of Dan McGrew, and I never made a very good job of it. And there was an old guy who was a fantastic burn singer in his day, old joker called Patrick was a member. And after I done it, Joker came out and he says to me, well, son, it's good that you tried, he said, but you'll never be a Burns. And I thought to myself, well, you know something, I'm going to prove you wrong. And Billy Christie, Billy was a great Burns man as well, but Billy died very young. Billy Christie was a man that came, says to me, right, he says, you learn something in Burns. He says, first of all, he gave me a book with the complete works of Burns. He says, and then get yourself a book, and he told me the name of it. It was a book by Hans Hecht, a German. And I gave that book to somebody and never got it back. But that, to this day, was probably the best Burns book I've ever read. It was excellent. So anyway, because I get ridiculed in Pussy Nancy's, I decided I was going to try and make myself better, and hopefully I did. So that was that part of it.
Well, you definitely made yourself better, and that's a great segue for this to go into something. And I've got to say, you've made yourself that good that when we're doing the video with Bob Bailey, you often recite a poem written by Burns in May of 1786 to a young man that I just think is a wonderful poem, and I think you're the best I've ever heard at doing it. And I'm not trying to push you in a corner because you might have something else lined up today, but if you can do a epistle to a young friend, I would absolutely love it.
Oh, well, I'll try that for you, aye. As you say, Jim, the epistle to a young friend was written to young Andrew Aiken, who at 17-year-old was about to go into the big bad world. And I often tell the audience this, Burns taking it upon himself to give the young man a bit of advice. And folk will say to me, who was Burns to give you the advice? But I flipped that on its side. Burns was perfect to give you advice because he's the first man to tell you that he made a lot of mistakes himself along the way. And he was giving the young boy advice simply to try to make him no make the same mistakes that he did. And the advice was the poem Epistle to a Young Friend. If you listen to what Burns says in the last verse, direct the read means to heed the advice. And you'll hear what Burns says to Epistle to a Young Friend. Along the thought, my youthful friend, I summoned to assent ye, though it should serve no other end than just a kind moment. And who the subject theme may gang, like time and chance determine, perhaps it may turn out a song, perhaps turn out a sermon. You'll try the world shin, my lad, and Andrew dear, believe me, you'll find mankind an unca squad and buckle them a grief. For care and trouble set your thoughts, even when your ends attained, and all your fears will come to naught when every nerve is strained. I'll no say men are villains all. The real hardened, wicked, will hae nae check but human law to a few restrict. But mankind are unca weak and little to be trusted. If self the wavering balance meet, it's rarely richt adjusted. Yet they who fall in fortune strive, their fate we need to censure. For still, the important end of life, they equally may answer. A man may have known his heart, yet purteth early steer him. A man may take a neighbour's pear, but he nae cash to spare. I free off on your story tell when we have bosom. But still keep something to yourself you'd scarcely tell to me. Conceal yourselves well you can for critical dissection, but take through every other man with sharp and sly inspection. The sacred lowe of ill-placed love, luxuriously indulgent, and never tempt to illicit rove when nothing should divulge it. I waive the quantum of the sin, the hazard to conceal it, but it hardens all within, and sacrifice the feeling. To catch Dame Fortune's golden smile, a serious weight upon her, and gather gear with every wile that's justified but on her. No for to hide it in a hedge, nor for a train attendant, but for the glorious privilege of being independent. The fear of hell is a hangman's whip to hold the wretch in order. But where you feel your honour grip, let that aye be your border. Its slightest touches, instant pause, debar all self-pretences, and resolutely keep its laws, uncaring consequences. The great creator to revere must sure become the creature, but still the preacher can't forbear or even the rigid teacher. And when with wits propane to range, the complacence extended, an atheist laughs a fair exchange for deity offended. When rant and rune and pleasures ring, religion may be blinded. But if she gie a random sting, it may be little minded. For when in life we're tempest driven, a conscience but a canker, a correspondence fixed with heaven, share a noble anchor. Adieu, young amiable youth, your heart be ne'er be won. With prudence, fortitude, and truth, erect your brow and dawn. In Plumen's phrase, God send you speed, still daily to go wiser, and may you better reck the read than ever did the advisor. That's a day, young friend.
Excellent.
Well done, Billy.
It's quite a poem.
It's a fantastic poem.
I think it would be of benefit to folk watching, John. I mean, I've phoned you on quite a few occasions and got you to do the odd favour for Burns clubs coming down and visiting the Bachelors Club and things like that. You're involved with, obviously, the Lodge in Tarbolton and the museum there. Can you just explain to the folk what it is and what you do?
Certainly, Jim. Well, as I said earlier in the wee intro, Billy's a member of the Lodge in Mauchline and I'm the member of the Lodge in Tarbolton. Now, it's a long story. I'll not get into it in great detail about all what happened, but Mauchline, I'm an honorary member of that lodge. Rightly, if you see the adverts in the papers when the Masonic means are known at the moment for obvious reasons, they are the mother lodge of Robert Burns. And Tarbolton, the lodge I'm a member of, is the lodge of Robert Burns. And they're both right. Burns became a member of the Masons on the 4th of July 1781. And there was two lodges in the village at that time. Billy's lodge, Lodge St David, and our lodge, Lodge St James. And they did realise a wee village the size of Dumbarton at that time, only about 200 residents. 2 lodges was too many. And they decided to amalgamate, which they did do. And but it was everything else. Usually these things don't work out. And the union of the 2 lodges only lasted under a year. And they split up, and Burns had the choice to either go with his mother lodge or the St James Lodge, and he came to the St James Lodge. So both lodges have got a claim. One's his mother lodge, the lodge he was initiated into the 4th of July 1781, and St James is the lodge he joined and became deputy master. And if Burns hadn't moved to Dumfries and lived long enough, he would have become the master of the lodge. But as I explained earlier, that wasn't the way the Masons were set up in the 18th century. But because he was such an active member, we have got the minute book from the period that Burns was deputy master, that 4-year period, and he signs the minute books 31 times. And one of the interesting things about it is, before his father dies, he signs just after his father dies, they must have decided, him and the family, to change their name, because one of the signatures, or 2 of the signatures I should say, in the old minute book, he signs his name Burness, and after their father passes away up at Lockley, they sign the book Burns. So that's quite unique, the fact that we'd have that. And I remember, Billy will remember this, we took a wee trip up to the Mitchell Library many years ago, and Enoch Curry, you'll all remember Enoch was still living then. Remember, Billy, when we went up with the book? We never did the book, but this wee curator at the Mitchell Library was telling us in 1996, the bicentenary of the death of Burns, Glasgow City Council purchased a letter that Burns had written to Willie Simpson in Ogletree, and they paid £10,000 for it at auction, simply because it had an authenticated Robert Burns signature at the bottom of it. And we, Enoch Curry at the time, says to him, "How much is a Burns signature worth?" He says, "Well, it's got to be a bona fide document." And Enoch never known about the minute book. He says, "But I know that something that was just an irrelevant document sold for £3,000 because it had a Burns signature on it." And Enoch says, "We've got a book in Bolton Lodge that's got 31 signatures. A wee man here passed out." He didn't change. He says 31 signatures are Burns, and he explained about the Burness signatures. So what we do is, Jim, you've seen this. When folk come, there's maybe once a year we have an open day in the lodge during the recess in the summer months, and we put all the relics out for visitors to see. The minute books has been there. The one he was initiated under, the St David minute book, we actually have it in the lodge at Bolton, and the St James minute book. Also, the apron he wore as deputy master hangs in the lodge, showing that. And also the Bible that Burns purchased, was asked by the lodge to go and buy the print works of John Wilson and Kilmarnock, the man that published his first edition. The Kilmarnock poems, Burns, and the receipt that he gets for the Bible. And the mallet that every master gets to hold if they become master of the lodge, that Burns used. A lot of the Masonic lodges have got the portrait. That's all there. So these things go out for folk to see, and they come from all over. I remember saying it earlier about David Heyman when he did the programme. He came and he stood up in the east of the lodge, and the master's footstools there that Burns would stand on, that's it, for the period, and the chair is there as well, the deputy master's chair. And that man, I remember, he's acted in all sorts of films, but he stood up and held the mallet, and he was kind of overcome easily. He was very emotional, man. So you've got to explain to people when they come to the lodge at Bolton that it's not the actual lodge that Burns was in. He was built in 1926. But the lodge that Burns would preside over was Manson's Inn, and that's doing what we called locally the Baker's Brae, but it's known as Burns Street now. There's a wee plinth in a council house garden that tells you this was the site of Manson's Inn, where Burns presided over the Sons of Light.
And where do your visitors come from? Afar afield?
All over Douglas. So we used to, as I say, we open it up once a year locally, and word gets out by word of mouth. But we also joined that Doors Open Day. You know, the Ayrshire Doors Open Day in September. So there's quite a lot of folk come, a lot of English people come, and Freemasons, it's an obvious attraction for Freemasons, but all sorts come. The school children have been doing as well, both the and the Bachelor's Club. So, but the museum itself, Jim, we always used to say, why we got all this stuff and yet it's all locked away and folk don't see it in the history the lodges had. So that museum, we got that, the Burns House in Mauchline, they had a load of cabinets, a big cabinets and that, they were thrown out, it was getting refurbished, and I can't remember the guy's name who phoned us and offered us them. So big John McAtee was talking about earlier, he had a big van, and we loaded that up and took it down, and the boys in the lodge built that wee room, turned it into the Lodge Museum themselves. It's quite a nice place to go, it really is.
Well, hopefully when this goes out around the world, you will get other folk visiting to come and see you. Well, the sad thing about it is, Douglas, this COVID pandemic has ruined many a thing. This was our 250th anniversary this very year, 2021. And I joined the Masons in 1979, and 42 years ago, and I obviously was too young for the bicentenary. And for the day I joined, I worked for it. I said, I hope I'm spared to celebrate the 250th. And with all sorts of things planned, big events, and the likes of Mauchline. We've got a great association with Mauchline, the two lodges, because of our Burns connection. We had Mauchline coming down for a night and having an impromptu Burns supper, just in the middle of the year. And we had the Grand Lodge coming to rededicate us and everything, and it's all up in the air. Saddest year of my life from that point of view, masonically. That's disappointing. Well, there's very few places when you think about it, our lodges is always America itself, the United States. Yep. They got a new president yesterday. But 250 years continuous, unbroken. It's a tremendous history to celebrate. It's fantastic. So hopefully you'll be able to celebrate it again in a few years' time. They say that, Douglas, but it'll not be the same in a way, because to be on the year, you know what I mean? 1771 to 2021. And Billy's Lodge, Mauchline, they're 3 years behind us. Their 250th will be in 2024. And with a wee Zoom meeting with Mauchline Lodge, I was on it, as I know I remember, just prior to Christmas. And I just said that to the boys and the brethren in Mauchline. I just hopefully that's all by then, and they can celebrate theirs in the actual year. And maybe we'll get an invite to theirs. But for that point of view, it's very, very disappointing that this is caused. But it's cancelled everything as you can. So yeah, of course. There's nothing we can do about it. You just hope they can get the vaccine out and people can, to see these numbers that are coming up on the television, I don't look at the news now. When they give you the daily updates of people that's passed away, it's horrific. Burns would have plenty to say about that, Dave, I'm quite sure. I'm sure he would.
John mentioned there, you asked John about where the visitors come from, and the answer to that's all over the world. And just the day before yesterday, I was copied in an email with the secretary of our lodge, and it was a guy that's on the chair of a lodge in Alabama, I'm quite sure it was, although don't quote me on that. And because of all this pandemic, what this guy's doing is he's trying to put together virtual tours of lodges that have got certain connections. No exactly Burns, but he got in touch with us knowing that Mauchline was Burns' mother lodge. So he's wanting us to do a virtual tour of the lodge and then give him somebody to narrate a history of the lodge so he can fit it in along with all these other things he's doing. And I mean, that's how worldwide the whole thing is. And a lot of that is down to Burns. I mean, as John was telling you, Burns was the only person that joined the Amalgamated Lodge. Now, the 4th of July wasn't significant then, but it's got a significance now when you start to talk to Americans, because Americans love them. And it's got a whole lot of significance now. But people ask me, Douglas, I mean, who were the people that helped you, and who were the people that pressed you when you were starting out in your Burns career? Well, there was a lot of them, but I always go back to, and John mentioned them just 5 minutes ago, I always go back to Enoch Curry. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. Enoch Curry was a tremendous human being. And he was one of the best. I could have listened to Enoch Curry speaking all night, every night. He was one of the guys that could hold you. Didn't matter what he was talking about. You just never get fed up listening to him. And a wee thing that a lot of people don't know about Enoch, in fact, most people will know though, he used to get ridiculously nervous. For somebody that was as ridiculously good, he got as nervous as a kitten. And he used to always, 9 burn suppers out of 10, he had a wee break before the mortal memory. And Enoch always used to go outside and find a wee dark corner somewhere to kind of draw his thoughts together and put himself together before he went back into doing a mortal memory, because he was so nervous. See, whenever he got to his feet, if he was still nervous when he was doing it, he would never ever have known. Tremendous bum speaker. And another funny story, and a true story about Enoch. We went to do a one supper at a bowling green, which is no so far from here, and it will remain nameless. And Enoch was doing the immortal memory. Of course, as the wanted custom, the haggis was addressed, and the wee plate of haggis neeps and tatties was handed out, and the haggis was off. And everybody was just sitting, looking at one another as if to say, I'm not eating that. So anyway, they quickly taken it away back in, and they served the rest of the meal, which was excellent, and had a wee break before the one supper started. And Enoch was in the toilet in the bowling club, and this wee old guy come in. He says, "Oh, hello, son." He says, "You'll be the man that's doing the immortal memory." Enoch says, "I am not." He says, "You'll be kind of nervous, sonny, you know." No, he says, "You don't do anything like that. Listen, and no be nervous." He says, "It's part and parcel." And the awful up at his hand round Enoch's shoulder, and he says, "Don't worry, son." He says, "You'll no be as stinking as the haggis."
Very good.
You know, highlights. There've been many highlights that I can just pick one or two. Obviously, doing the mortal memory at Mauchline and Interpol. There are no many people. I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but there are no many people have done that. The two lodges here in Ayrshire that Burns had in major connections with. Another couple of highlights of mine was in the early days of the Holy Fair, when we used to do the Jolly Beggars on the stage. I mean, that was fantastic. And
It was excellent.
people used to say to me, "I tell you, you can't half act being drunk and just enjoying yourself." I said, "We're no acting." I said, we probably are drunk. But another great honour for me and for John was 4 years ago. Hughie Farrell asked us to come down to the cottage to the Friends of Robert Burns supper. And I mean, if you ever walked in there knowing that you're going to do something at a Burns supper, into the wee rooms with the beer stain and the beer flare, and I think there's about 35 marks at it. I mean, that you hear folks saying about the hair standing up in the back of your neck. If that doesn't make the hair stand up in the back of your neck, nothing will. It was a tremendous honour. It was an absolutely fabulous night. Fabulous. And I'll be indebted to Hugh Farrell for letting us do that for the rest of my life. But there's also highlights that are comical, and they're nothing to do with Burns. And I'll tell you one about, a good number of years ago, Big Bob Lawrence, that John mentioned earlier. He used to chair the Burns supper in Mauchline. Then many years ago, a well-known at the time DJ with an Ayrshire radio station came to the Burns supper as a guest of one of the boys that came every year. His name will remain where it is. And they come in, and Bob says, "Oh, there's such and such." He says, "I'll just go and ask him if he wants to do something." So he went down, and he says, No. He says, "I'm just here to enjoy myself. So as the night went on, I think he 2 or 3 wee whiskies and that, and he got a wee bit bolder, and he went up to Bob and he says, "Listen, I'd like to do something. I'll do something for you." So Big Bob went to great lengths to introduce this famous radio DJ, and he got to his feet and he sung the Rose of Tralee. And another one just only 3 years ago, when I was sharing the bird supper at Mauchline, this fella says to me, my son's here with me and he's got his guitar. I says, well, I'll get him up. I'm the very man, I'll get him up a wee bit later on. That'll be great. So I introduced this boy and up we go to get this guitar out, and he gave us a status quo number. So it's no, the highlights are no, that was a brilliant memory, or that was a brilliant tam o' shanter. Some of the highlights will stick with you for the rest of their life, and they're really funny.
Very good.
Can I mention something, Douglas?
Aye, go on.
It's no away for the Masons. I had the great honour of being the captain of Ballochmyle Golf Club in 1996, the bicentenary of Burns's death, and we had a Burns supper in the July in the golf club, and as you ken the connection with Ballochmyle and Burns, the Bonnie Lass of Ballochmyle,
Yeah,
and the Catherine Woods, etc. And I remember the committee meeting, I says, I think we'll invite Sir Claude Alexander and Lady Alexander to come. And if I remember, Rick Bully says, he'll probably not come. He said, well, there are things today. I said, well, we'll try it anyway. So I get the secretary to send a letter. And here he duly accepted. And he came, and I went out to the car park to meet him. And the car drew in, the big Elvis at the time, that was the car. And he got out the car, and I says, delighted, I'm the captain, Sir Claude, delighted you accepted my invitation to come. I'm more than happy because of the connection of the golf club, and well, the ground belonged to them, the Alexanders of Ballochmyle. And his wife got out of the car, and I says, and what's your name? And she says, Lady Alexander. That's you picking your place. The great thing about that Burns supper, Douglas and Jim, was that everybody that took part that night, it was a full Burns supper, although it was in July, was all a member of the golf club. The whole lot, the music, the recitations, the songs, the immortal memory, everything you did at a Burns supper, was every one of them was a member of the golf club. And one of the things that I'll never forget, it's indelibly imprinted in my mind, was Sir Claude did a wee talk about the connection with the Burns family in Burns because of Lady Wilhelmina. And I remember him saying, Billy will remember this, he stood up and he says, to this day, the eldest son married of the Alexander family bears the title of Bonnie Lass of Ballochmyle. And they had a dinner, a commemorative dinner every year, which they held in Kinklew. The big house was gone by then, but it's a big enough house to eat, Kinklew. And they have a dinner, and Bonnie Lass, they've got a Bonnie Lass quake, silver quake is back to Burns, the time of Burns, and they have a toast to the Bonnie Lass. They tell us that night it was his great niece who was bearing the title of the Bonnie Lass of Ballochmyle. What a connection, it's unbelievable.
See, John was talking about that night that Sir Claude and Lady Alexander were at the golf club. He also told, I don't know whether John was there, but he certainly told me, and this is no just for this night, this is dead on truth. As you know, the Bonnie Lass of Ballochmyle, the song was originally just a letter that Burns wrote to give to Wilhelmina Alexander when he saw her walking about the woods at Ballochmyle. But of course, Burns being the lower echelons and her being the lady of the house, it was never going to happen, you know. And I think it was one of Burns's, one of Wilhelmina's brothers that met Burns in the street, and the story goes that he was scolding him for having the cheek to even suppose that his sister would have gone into day with him. And Burns wrote in a wee bit of paper, when God decreed that their pockets should be full, he was equally adamant that their heads should be empty. So, and Sir Claude Alexander told us that night when Wilhelmina Alexander died in her flat in London. I think she was somewhere about 86 or 87 years old. That letter that Burns gave her was found in her personal belongings.
That's right, he said that.
That is 100% absolute truth what that guy told us that night.
Yeah, tremendous.
So there you go. She must have thought something of him.
Aye.
Before the first lockdown, the last place I visited was a Natural History Museum. And I went in, I'd never been in it before, and the first thing I saw was a huge skeleton in a Brontosaurus. And I was amazed, and I'm looking at this thing, and this wee guy was just sweeping the flare that worked in the place. And I says to him, excuse me, I says, what age do you think that dinosaur is, or the skeleton of it? He says, it's 262 million in 9 months old. I says, that's pretty accurate. How do you ken that? He says, I get this job in here 9 months ago.
Oh, very good. Well, listen, guys, we'll finish on that note. And
A woman's joke.
it just leaves me to say thanks very much for your time. It's been great hearing about your lives with Robert Burns, and maybe we'll come back later on in the year for a further episode and you can tell us more about it.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure, Douglas and Jim. Thanks very much for having us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.